Hello guys, Colin here. This is the Waza Tube Amp Expander from Boss, an incredibly powerful and complex amp control centre which functions as an impedance selectable reactive load box, continuous control attenuator with integrated 100 watt power amp, impulse response loader, MIDI controller, USB interface and far more besides. Now, if you have no idea what any of those words I just said mean, then don't worry. That's exactly why Boss have asked me if I'll do a video on the technology and function of this frankly mind-bending device to help the average player understand why the Tube Amp Expander is the ideal solution for the requirements of modern musicians, both on stage and in the studio. This is no small feat, as there is a lot to talk about here. So I'm going to break the concepts down into three main areas: load boxes, attenuators, and IR loaders. We'll talk about each in turn before moving on to specifically the Waza Tube Amp Expander and what it can do. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. A valve amplifier requires a load to operate correctly and safely. A load can be viewed as a specific set of electrical properties which matches what the amp is expecting to see. The electrical load the amp expects to labour under. These electrical properties we can call impedance. Conventionally, a load would be a speaker in a cabinet. Speakers and output transformers in valve amps speak to each other through fluctuations in these electrical properties. Changes in one influence the response of the other. This is what gives that coveted feel and response associated with valve amplifiers. This coupled nature between output transformer and speakers is highly desirable, and the lack of it is what makes solid-state amps feel and sound so much more flat and sterile by comparison. Without this load, the output valves and transformer in a valve amplifier see an infinite impedance, which results in voltage spiking in the components as a signal is sent through the amp. This rapidly rising voltage can cause irreversible damage to the output transformer, valves, and other components within the amp, so ensuring a load is attached before operating a valve amplifier is essential. Although ever more in modern live and studio environments, users are wanting to operate their valve amplifiers without a speaker attached, going straight to the front of house in a live environment or to the recording desk in a studio without the burden of a speaker making a lot of noise. In these situations, one would require a dummy load, something that behaves similarly to a speaker in terms of its electrical properties, but doesn't generate sound. You might think this can be simply achieved by attaching a big resistor of the appropriate resistance to the amplifier's speaker output. Like, instead of having an 8 ohm cab, you just got a big 8 ohm resistor that can handle the amplifier's power, and that would be all you need. But that's far from the whole story, and it's hardly the desirable solution. This would be what is termed as a resistive load, and while an amplifier can operate safely in this fashion, safely operating and correctly operating are two very different things. You see, a resistor doesn't behave like a speaker. It's static in its electrical properties and doesn't react, respond, and influence the amp's behaviour like a true load would. A resistive load would leave a valve amp sounding sterile, like a distortion pedal plugged straight into an audio interface, or indeed a solid-state amp. This is because resistance is only one part of a load. We call the ohmic value on our speakers and amplifiers impedance. Impedance is a more complex form of resistance to alternating electric current. Impedance consists of a magnitude element, the static resistance, but also a phase element, inductance and capacitance, which are in constant flux. Impedance changes over time in response to frequency, so depending on what your guitar signal is doing, changes the way the amplifier and load interact. With a simple resistive load, this cannot happen, hence why better quality load boxes are always reactive loads. Reactive loads include LC components to recreate this reactive nature between amplifier and load, mimicking much more closely the way a speaker acts when connected to an amplifier. Reactive loads, like speakers themselves, have their own individual way of interacting with an amplifier, so no two reactive loads are likely to be the same. Choosing the correct reactive load for your application is incredibly important. In a very basic and general sense, attenuation means to reduce the intensity of something. When talking about an amplifier, that something is the level of your amplified signal, but it is possible to reduce the level of the signal at various points before and throughout the amplifier. You can reduce your guitar's volume control, turn down the preamp volume, master volume, or even put a volume pedal in the effects loop. All of these previous methods mentioned turn down the signal level ahead of the power section of the amp, and while they all do have the effect of lowering the signal, they do so at the cost of amp tonality. They will all change the sound of the amp to some degree. A large part about getting a valve amp to sound great is being able to turn the master volume loud enough that the power section starts to saturate, adding its own distortion, sag and artifacts to the sound. Reducing the signal level before the power section is simply working against yourself if the goal is to defeat the amplifier's headroom for those sweet cranked amp tones. Check out my video all about headroom for more specifics on this. So when we talk about attenuators for guitar amplifiers, there's a very specific meaning as to where the signal is being attenuated. Attenuators reduce the signal after the power section, reducing the level of signal that the speaker sees. Attenuating the signal post-power section retains all of that power amp saturation tone, but delivers it to the speakers at a level that won't blow out the windows. Placing a device between the amp's speaker output and the cabinet requires some specialist, heavy-duty equipment. The signal levels that are sent out from the amplifier's speaker output would vaporise a normal guitar pedal or audio interface, for example. So attenuators are made for much more robust circuits to handle the full power of the amplifier and dissipate the extra power safely. The only thing missing from an attenuated signal is the unique sound of a speaker being driven loud, but that's a small price to pay for extra controllability over a valve amp running full. Impulse responses are used to recreate the response and sound of a particular speaker, cabinet and microphone arrangement. By sending a very short but powerful signal, called an impulse, into a speaker, we can capture how that speaker responds to the impulse. What we're left with is, logically, called an impulse response, or IR for short. And knowing how a speaker responds to a very short, instantaneous signal allows us to make an accurate recreation of how that speaker setup will react to any signal we choose to put through it. Capturing enough speakers, cabinets and microphone combinations allows us to build a huge selection of tones that eliminates the need to own multiple cabinets or even know anything about the techniques of miking a cabinet. Sending an audio signal through an impulse response rather than a real cabinet secures the tone of specific speakers and microphones for recording or live use. This is particularly useful in the studio as it allows you to send audio through different IRs to get a tone that fits the mix perfectly without having to retrack parts. It's also very useful in a live environment as you can send the same tone to the front of house night after night without having to worry about an undesirable house cab messing up your sound. Having the ability to output from an IR and make a real cabinet at the same time allows the sound engineer to blend two different cabinet sounds in the front of house mix, allowing for a bigger, wider and better guitar sound without the need to run a full stereo stage setup. Those are the three main concepts at the core of the Waza Tube Amp Expander. By providing a range of selectable reactive loads, it can mimic a plethora of speakers and cabinets, allowing your amplifier to believe it's connected to anything from a tiny 112 open back to an oversized closed back 412. These aren't just some different EQ settings or anything quaint like that, these are 16 dedicated analog reactive loads in one box. You can really feel the amplifier responding differently depending on where these dials are set. It's also an attenuator, allowing you to crank the master on your valve amp to get those saturated, headroom defeated tones, but do so at any level of loudness. It achieves this by loading the signal down to 0 and then utilising the incorporated 100 watt power amp to amplify to any signal level using the continuously adjustable volume control, unlike other attenuators which use stepped controls. The advantage of Boss opting for this arrangement is that you can get the same tone regardless of where the output is set on the Tube Amp Expander. Step controls engage different amounts of attenuation with each step, and as you reduce the output, you change how the amp sounds. By loading everything to just one attenuation level and then using the integrated power amp to effectively reamp the sound, you get the same tone at any volume level. This can also mean that low wattage amps can be made louder while retaining their unique tones. So if you want to play a stadium with the tones from your 5 watt mini valve amp, then that's totally possible with the Waza Tube Amp Expander. And finally, with an array of inbuilt cabinet impulse responses and the ability to load in any third-party IRs you may prefer to use, you can get the tonality of any speaker cabinet and mic combination to complete the trinity. So this gives the responsiveness of any speaker with the sound of any cabinet while providing cranked power amp tones at any volume level. Add to that the ability to save and recall up to 10 combinations of these settings, all the connectivity you could ever possibly need with XLR line out, USB direct recording and MIDI control, as well as useful extras like built-in effects and an effects loop so that you can add extra functionality to vintage valve amps that may lack these features, and it's easy to see why this powerhouse of a product is so damn exciting. It's difficult to know where we should start in demonstrating the Waza Tube Amp Expander as there is so much going on. But perhaps the best place to begin is by flexing the Attenuator's muscles. I've recently acquired this beast of an amplifier from Engel. This is a 120 watt Savage Mark II. Everything about this amplifier is overkill, including its volume output. Without an attenuator, there's no way I could run this thing in my home studio without breaking every local noise ordinance law. But with the Waza Tube Amp Expander, I should hopefully be able to get the master volume cranked up while keeping what comes out of the cabinet at conversation level loudness. And to provide you a little bit of proof, you can see the room microphone sitting in front of me here, picking up both my voice and the cabinet. Our volumes here, the channel volume's almost all the way up, the master volume is around about 7, and I can still happily speak over the noise this cabinet's making. That's an attenuator in action. The opposite is also true. The half-watt mode in my Orange Rocker Terror is plenty loud for studio work, but probably wouldn't cut it on a stage. The Waza Tube Amp Expander's 100 watt solid state power section acts like my own personal PA amplifier, taking the raw tone from the valve amp and making it louder without affecting the sound in any other way. The resonance and presence impedance controls let you select between 16 different reactive load combinations. These dictate what type of load your amplifier is reacting to, giving you the feeling of being connected to different types of cabinets. There's no right or wrong here, it's just a case of switching it up until you find something that works for your amplifier's tone. All the sounds so far have been from my microphone setup capturing the sound from my beautiful Hoffnine cabinet. But let's imagine a situation where I turn up to a show and there are no house cabs, or the ones that are there are utterly tragic. Not to fear, the Waza Tube Amp Expander not only allows you to operate your valve amplifier safely without a cabinet in sight, but it also has a dedicated front of house connection for your sound engineer to run to their mixing desk. This, alongside the stereo lineouts and headphone connection, have cabinet impulse responses applied, which can be set up alongside any extra effects by using the software, into the 10 rigs which can be recalled from the knob on the front panel. So let's hear what kind of sounds can be accomplished with these. I think that covers all the major features of the Tube Amp Expander, aside from the foot switch which lets you tap dance your way to victory through all of these settings and more, including controlling your amp's channels through the Tube Amp Expander. But I don't have the foot switch, so I can't show you that. Ultimately, who is going to use this? Well, musicians playing live and touring with valve amplifiers are going to love it, as it means you can get those sick, cranked amp tones at volume levels your sound engineer will be happy with. On top of that, you can provide the sound engineer with signal from both the cabinet mic and the Waza Tube Amp Expander's dedicated front of house connection. Sound engineers love having options like this, as it means they can blend sounds for a bigger, wider and better guitar spread, ultimately giving your audience a better sound. And it's consistent night after night, and you don't have to worry about turning up to a venue and there not being an appropriate cab for your amplifier. Another application is a sweet studio tool. Because of the attenuation and all the different reactive loads, it's possible to get any amplifier, no matter how big or how small, to sound its absolute best at the correct volume for recording, whatever that may be. Without something like this, the perfect tone might be too quiet or too loud for the ideal recording scenario. So whether it's consistency in a professional studio you're looking for, or keeping things on the down low for a home studio, this really nails it. While a lot of the extra functionality of this device caters towards the live user and isn't really necessary in a studio environment, it doesn't mean that this isn't worth serious consideration for you studio guys. Perhaps Boss will consider a stripped-back studio version of this sometime in the future, free from the clutter of the inbuilt effects and foot switch controllability, which are really unnecessary in a device that won't see the rigours of touring. It doesn't mean these features are bad, it just means that they're kind of unnecessary in a studio environment, so it might be nice to see two different options to choose from, depending on your application. Or maybe you just longed for the good old days where you were out gigging with that Marshall amp on 10, getting the best tones of your life. But now that amp sits gathering dust as you view it with tearful, emotional eyes, as you make do with a smaller, quieter digital amp for home use. Now your gigging days are done. But you could relive those glory days and get that Marshall cranked up once again with the Waza Tube Amp Expander keeping the volume low. There's certainly nothing stopping you creating your dream setup at home now that this exists. I think we should close out here, as this has been quite a long and involved video, but if you want to find out more about the Waza Tube Amp Expander's other functionality, or even purchase one for yourself, then links will be in the description of this video. And if you've liked this video and you want to see more content from me, then you can hit that subscribe button, which will notify you of all new content as it comes out. My Patreon's also there for exclusive secret stuff, t-shirts are available, and there's other videos that you might not have seen. But that's all for now guys, keep it loud, and I'll see you later. Blah, 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 blah.